Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, your daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York City, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to our show. This is our class on the Srimad Bhagavatam. We do it every morning. And today we have a special guest. It's a special day. Yesterday was special. We had question day. I really like question day, Kaustubha.
I do too.
It was great. It was great. Questions too. And it's part of like sharpening your intelligence, right? Your discernment. We don't, in genuine spiritual life, there's reasonable faith, but we're not supposed to extend faith so much that we're just believing completely in the unknown. There's small increments of understanding, and it encourages us to just move forward and move forward. We always say if you bite off more than you can chew, you're never going to develop foundation and roots in your spiritual practice. And anytime there's a challenge that comes along, either to your mind or your body or some other person challenging your belief system, you end up just becoming like a tree with no roots. You just fall down. And we want to be deeply rooted in our spiritual convictions out of our own realizations, not just some hope for some pie in the sky when we die. It's got to be really based on realizations. So it's nice that we have these questions today. It's important. And if people don't ask questions, that's when I actually start to worry about the person. No one's interested in any blind followers. You know, it's not helpful. It's not helpful for your own growth. It just creates a little club of fanaticism. And in genuine spiritual life, you want to be very broad-minded in your approach. And so we have a very, very special guest today. You want to announce him, Kaustubha?
I would be happy to. I've been mentioning all week that I've been waiting for this day. You know, you mentioned we've been doing these questions and answers. I think that was our 6th question and answer thing. So that's become a regular weekly thing. But we were also considering having regular guests on too. I don't know, weekly or maybe every other week or something like that to bring on special guests. And
yeah,
I think it's a great feature because it's one thing to talk philosophy, you know, but it's another thing to see how it plays out in people's lives. And so, you know, I remember back when we were Super Soul Sacred Sangha and we brought Sachi Sutta on, you know, Steve Reddy, who, you know, you go way back with him as a friend, and, you know, when you're in your band, and I think he was your roadie then, right?
Right. Yeah, tour manager.
Tour manager. And then he when I guess took over a label that you kind of started or something, like a record label.
Yeah, we had a record label, believe it or not, in the ashram called
In the ashram.
We are monks with record labels.
Yeah. So he took that label and built it up from a seed to like a you know, big business now. And but he's just an exceptional guy in the way that he lives and how he's taken the teachings of Bhakti and applied them in his life. I guess you could say as a business person.
Well, I think when we think of spiritual life, we think of either a recluse, someone, you know, living in a cave, a hermit. Anyone who's really sincere about spiritual life should have nothing. But, you know, there's ways to be in this world, but not of this world. So it's nice just to meet people and see who've been on the journey for a while and how they wind it in with their life, and how they stay sort of, just like I said, in it, but sort of not of it. So it's a very, very nice thing to witness if you're new to a spiritual path, because some of us aren't ready to, you know, give up everything, and it's not required in Bhakti yoga. But we have to see things in appropriate perspective, or else we just get caught up in the same old illusions of life.
Yeah. So our guest today is Ghanashyam. Ghanashyam, maybe I'll ask Ghanashyam to explain what his name is, but before we go there, he's an old friend of ours. We go back, I think I met you, Ghanashyam, around 2000 or so. Is that when you started coming around?
Yes, 2001.
2001, and I met him at 26 Second Avenue, like the original Krishna temple in the United States, which is just a little storefront. But Ghanashyam, he became a monk and was trained as a monk at the Bhakti Center, I think for about 10 years or so.
11 years, yep.
11 years living as a monk at the Bhakti Center. And then he took that training that he received, the study and the habits and the lifestyle, and married a beautiful devotee woman, Bhakti Lata, a girl who was raised as a Krishna Bhakta, multi-talented, who's a teacher in the New York public school system, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and he went on to become, currently he's serving as the Hindu chaplain or a palliative chaplain at New York Presbyterian Hospital, which is the #1 rated hospital, I think not only in New York City, but in New York State, and one of the top 5 ranked hospitals in the nation. And as a chaplain or as a palliative chaplain, he's taking that training and that philosophy and that wisdom that he gained as a monk, and he's using it to serve people that are dying, like every day in the hospitals in New York City. So it's a fascinating, I was thinking, I always wanted to bring you onto the show anyway, but particularly, the current situation that the New York Presbyterian Hospital has set up a clinic specifically for people who've contracted coronavirus. And that, if I understand correctly, that's your full-time engagement is serving the families and people who have contracted coronavirus. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you are, we've been mentioning on the show, it's 7 p.m. in New York City and in other places in the world, people are, opening up their windows and cheering and banging on their pots and pans, and but for people who are, who are putting themselves at risk to serve others, and so you are one of those heroes. So we offer you our respect. You always have our love, and you've always had our respect. But I don't know if it could have been more, but it's increasing with the service that you're doing. So welcome to the show, Ghanashyam.
Thank you. So grateful, glad to be with you guys. I've been listening to a lot of the talks, the podcasts lately, and I really love how you guys are doing this, and I'm getting a lot from it. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And I should also mention that Ghanashyam is quite the Bhagavatam scholar too. He as a monk and continuing after his life as a monk, he's been one of the important teachers at the Bhakti Center. He has a particular, love for and he's learned in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So for so many reasons, I've always wanted to have him here as a guest. So let's just start by asking you a bit, just to start with your background a little bit. Like, how did you come to the practice of Bhakti Yoga?
Well, for me, it was mostly a kind of shift in college from arts, music. I was studying classical music.
You're a pianist, if I remember correctly, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And I was studying classical music at college, and I was always amazed, especially, like composers like Bach, I loved. And listening to music, I would just feel the beauty of it. Somehow you can, just by the combination of sounds, you hear this beauty. And I used to just wonder, like, what is that? And how do I experience more of that? I remember I took a conducting class. They have conductors, and for the final examination, you have to conduct a symphony, which is like one movement, not a whole symphony, but just that was part of the class. And I remember working on this piece and the stand in front of all those instruments. And after practicing so many days, eventually the orchestra started to click, and everybody knew their part, and I started to know the music really well. And I was just standing there and hearing this music, and I was like lost my breath, it was so beautiful, and I was so overwhelmed by the experience. And I remember leaving, going back to my room that night in college and thinking, like, whatever that was, that experience of beauty, I just want more of that. I don't know what that is. I don't know what I'm searching for, but it was so overwhelming. And that started to lead to questions just about God and what's the source of that beauty? What's the source of those kind of experiences? And
How old
so
were you at the time?
this is 20 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I started going to the library there at the college and just I would be in the religion section, spirituality section, because these questions are starting to come up for me. And in that library was the Bhagavatam. There was Prabhupada's all, 12 volumes. And I was like thinking, like, what is this book? It's gigantic. So I pulled it and started reading a little bit here and there, and kind of did a little research on my own when I saw Prabhupada's picture in the back, and I just started getting into it in that way. So really, it kind of went from music, classical music, to searching like, what am I seeking through classical music? Like the beauty of the sound, and that kind of led to what's the source of that? What's the source of beauty? And questions of God.
Amazing. You're one of the people that came through music, but not through shelter.
Yeah, a little different music scene for me.
Real music scene. Once you actually can play music.
Well,
it's amazing how and like, by the way, this is an interesting point, I think, for everybody out there. Like, how do you go, and me and Kaustubha sort of had this experience, but I'd like to hear everybody. How do you go from being a monk with nothing, living alone, and all of a sudden married with a career? How was that transition for you? Was it like some people, it's a very difficult transition, re-entering the material world, so to speak.
Yeah, when I became a monk, I had a feeling I was going to be there for a long time and possibly my whole life. I don't know if all monks think that in the beginning, but I kind of did, because I was really searching and I was getting so much inspiration from that life. And I really love just the spiritual brotherhood, and the just getting absorbed every day and hearing and chanting. And so I was thinking from the very beginning, like, I'm going to be here definitely for several years, hopefully longer. And so when I did make a change, it was hard at first, and I knew there was going to be many things that I would miss. But at the same time, after about 10 years, I started to realize that I felt like this change was going to be good for me as well, because so many years of just chanting, meditation, I felt like I'm a very inward person anyway. So I felt like I just wanted to kind of go out more and get involved in other people's lives and do more in that way. And so it felt like that was starting to come up for me, almost like, like breathing. There's the in-breath and the out-breath. And when you take a good full in-breath, you also naturally want to breathe out. And so I felt like more getting involved. I even wanted a job. I wanted like I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I was thinking kind of work. I want to work,
Not like me. I never managed to get a job.
And you never wanted to work.
Yeah. So because I've always been kind of a little bit of an introvert. And so even before, even while I was in college, I would like I said, I was obsessed with like classical music, and I would just kind of be to myself and just think about things. And so I was kind of looking forward to like developing another side of myself. And so it was kind of natural for me. And I'm really glad I made that decision, and it's really worked out great.
How do you get to be a chaplain?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how did you immediately, so what you're describing right now, did that immediately lead you to the idea of serving like this in hospitals, or how did that come up?
This kind of work has like naturally come to me. Like even in the monastery that I was given a position at one point as like monastic counselor, and I was counseling other like monks. And so I always had this kind of come to me where people felt it was easy to speak with me, or they came to me for some help or some discussion. And so it's kind of part of my nature. I like talking to people like one-on-one, or just a few people together,
I'm going to come for some facial grooming advice. You look good. I'm not scary. Sitting up here in the woods.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So I started when I was realizing I was going to change and leave the ashram and start looking for work. I just did research. I was thinking, what is spiritual work in the world? you know, and I looked up different things and I realized, well, hospitals have spiritual care departments. And I was attracted to that because I thought, okay, that sounds pretty uncomfortable to be around people who are suffering and dying. And maybe that's good for me just for that reason. I want to become more comfortable with what's uncomfortable for me. And so there was this attraction to like being around suffering, being around death, and putting myself there and getting more comfortable with it. I always felt like, you know, death and dying is like there's a key there to real spiritual advancement because it's so confronting. You know, so I researched and I found out hospitals do these programs. I got involved, and one thing led to the next. I did like a training, and I got hired after I did the training, and so I've been doing that ever since now.
I find that really interesting. You say become comfortable with what's uncomfortable. Because in one sense, maybe that's part of the monk training too, right? It's like you voluntarily take up austerities. You know, you're sleeping on the floor, you're, you know, giving up, you know, so much of what the senses are demanding you to give up. And you learn to become comfortable with that. You learn that really where we're uncomfortable is in the mind, and the mind is something that we can control.
You know, it's another thing, Kaustubha, it's like uncomfortable. And we have a lot of people like Zoe on the show, and Eric Noble and Dr. Schwepp. You know, they're dealing, and Prabhu here, they're dealing with the thing that everybody's sticking their head in the sand about their entire life, like my own death. And they're seeing it in people like right next to them. They're seeing death and disease and suffering every day.
Yeah.
And that's like overwhelming.
Most people want to get a little further from that.
They want to get further from it. I mean, I get a few times I've been to the hospital for, you know, a child or something, or myself. It's like once I get in there, I start to freak out. I realize, oh, I get it. I'm not just sick, or my son's not just sick. Everybody's sick here. You get that wake up call that, you see, this is real. We contain it in this box, in these rooms, but this is a real thing. And to face that every day it's a very, very sobering view of reality, which a lot of us, including myself, you know, sitting in La La Land thinking everything's cool. And this is sort of reality. And it's actually beautiful. And I think it accompanies a person's spiritual life really well. Can you comment on that, Ghanashyam, please?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, I asked, Raghunath Swami told me once that the greatest, you know, spiritual meditation is Krishna. And he said the greatest material meditation is death, you know, and just the idea of like, to really get in touch with the reality of death, it's such an asset for developing spiritually. Just stay, not that you're always anxious or fearful, or you're kind of like, you know, because of it, you're just always, you know, thinking of it in some morbid way, but just the idea of like, no, this is going to happen. This is coming. I'm around it. I'm seeing it all the time. And so there's a sense of urgency, but the urgency doesn't mean you have to get more and more busy and do more and more, but it just means now to realize to be attentive to spiritual practice and spiritual life. And so that's kind of how I see what urgency means. It doesn't just mean like do lots of service and just take all kinds of risks and do more outward, but more like, okay, let me get really focused and attentive now when I do have my practice of hearing, chanting, and serving others.
So you don't, in other words, we've spent some time actually even recently like discussing the value of contemplating death. And our episode 79 was entitled "Death, Skulls, Graveyards, and Other Sources of Inspiration," and it was you know, especially we spoke about that. And so if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's that we can tend to be lax as we move through life, and even if we have like some kind of spiritual aspiration or spiritual path that we're following. That is it just that the energy of the world that we're living in tends to make us forgetful or lackadaisical or procrastinate about the seriousness of what this opportunity of human life is, and that contemplating death reminds us of that urgency?
Yeah, I mean, death is so confronting, you know. It's like we want to live, we want to love others, we want relationships, we want and there's this thing called death that just stops it all. It's like the ultimate confrontation to those desires that we have. And so it's like, to really deal with it, I feel like is like the key to real true spiritual living, is to deal with this reality, to face it and to accept it and to live through it, to still live fully and to still serve with love and to still trust in the face of death,
Mm.
And so I find like it's really a powerful meditation to keep, Prabhupada says in one place that a true philosopher always keeps death in the forefront of their mind, and it can really be a help. And so absolutely.
There's that saying, I'm not sure where it comes from, but I don't know if it just comes from the yoga or the Hindu tradition, or if it probably does, but rather than like an actual scriptural source. But that one should study as if they'll live forever, and one should practice sadhana, do their spiritual practice as if they're going to die tomorrow. Right. So that,
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a valuable one, right? That we study, like we never think, oh, it's too late for me to get into this, or it's too late for me to get into that, But no, our entire life should be, we should always be a student. But
well, good morning, everybody.
but
one of those uplifting morning shows.
Well, that's the uplifting part of it. I haven't said the more morbid part of it.
Well, and we have a list of questions for you too. But I have to jump in here and just ask: do you get depressed? I mean, there's one wonderful lady who came to teacher training one year, and Kaustubha knows her, and she just came to me, and other people have come to me like this too. Says, I work as an EMT, I work as a paramedic, and I just see so many traumatic things per day. I'm overwhelmed. We have a student that's a cop, a New York City cop, and he's just like, it gets depressing. It gets overwhelming. It gets, you sometimes see the worst in people. And they sometimes they go in pilgrimage or teacher training just to sort of cope with it, or sometimes just I got to get away from this. Do you feel like that? Or do you feel like it's uplifting, or does the uplifting, is it balanced? Is it more inspiring? Or is it just like, I got to go and forget about all this too? What's your take on it, seeing on a regular basis?
Yeah, for me personally, I like to be with people when they're going, and just to be a kind of like a compassionate presence, whatever anyone's going through, and to be with them. So I get a lot of inspiration to them, just for the fact that I'm serving them at a difficult time, and I'm able to kind of like empathize, but I also let it pass through me, like whatever anybody's experiencing. Like I also don't cling to it afterwards, and I try that for myself too in my own life, even whatever I'm going through. So there are moments of experiences like that, but I also, just for me, I take a lot of shelter from hearing spiritual literature, hearing spiritual lectures, and that kind of just again reminds me of what's most essential, and I kind of put my mind back in that place. So definitely there are moments of being overwhelmed. I mean, right now in the hospital is, it's not so common for me to experience like 8 or 9 deaths in one day, which was happening last week. And so many people were just overwhelmed. In fact, I'm at the hospital now. I got off already, but I had an overnight shift tonight, and so there's a chaplain on call overnight in case there's some death or some emergency. They want some spiritual support to be available as well. So tonight there was a nurse who called me and asked if I could come and support her, because she just experienced 3 deaths in about a half an hour, and so she was totally overwhelmed, and she just wanted like a prayer, and she just wanted to talk a little bit. So yeah, it can get heavy at times, and but I do find a lot of purpose in this work and inspiration, and so I kind of I keep just re-nourishing myself outside of work, or even during work, because I'm a chaplain at the hospital. It's like my manager even understands that we're all like priests and spiritual people, so she gives us breaks, and she allows us to take what we need for ourselves in between visits and so forth.
How do you re-nourish yourself? Let's say even when you're at work.
Yeah, even before, like, if I'm going to visit someone, because of what I'm about to walk into, I just keep putting myself in a certain consciousness, like Krishna, I have no idea how to help this person right now. I don't know what I'm about to walk into. I don't know the family dynamics. I don't know what their disease is, because sometimes it's just a call. Okay, we need a chaplain report to this unit,
Yeah.
And so I don't even do the research sometimes before I go of what's happening. I just go, and I go in a kind of prayerful mood that I don't know what to do here, but Krishna, please allow me to serve in some way. And I'm just going to be open to some direction that you give. And so even during this work, which is why I find this work so amazing, is that it keeps me in kind of a spiritual consciousness.
So especially through prayer, you're saying.
Yeah.
Excuse me, just for my own, I'm just a little ignorant about a chaplain. Is there like the Christian chaplain? We need a Christian chaplain, or are you like a chaplain for? Can you go in there if someone's Islamic or Christian or Jewish, or are you like the Hindu chaplain? How does it work? Are you the chaplain for everybody, or just specific religious traditions?
Yeah, they have chaplains for every tradition. But all of us act as like kind of interfaith chaplains, and all of us are available for anybody. So most of, the calls that I respond to have nothing to do with Hindu patients. They're just people who are in need, who just need to talk, or just need to connect, or want some kind of spiritual support. So if there is a Hindu patient, or then obviously I'll get the direct referral, because that's my tradition, my background. But basically, a lot of the chaplains are just assigned units. So I can just walk in from room to room and just introduce myself. And, so like one of the units I work on is oncology, cancer. So part of my day, I'm just walking in one room to the next and just saying, introducing myself. And I'm from the spiritual care department, just here to check in and see if there's anything you need. And like that.
What a blessing that must be to have you walk in there.
No.
I'm curious about the circumstance in the hospital right now. I live just a few blocks away from Mount Sinai Hospital, and which is like directly across the street from Central Park, where I can see that they're setting up tents. Like it's almost looks like the Civil War or something out there. They're putting out tents for the overflow of patients due to the coronavirus. And from what I understand, all the hospitals in New York City right now are experiencing, a real stretch. And if I understand this correctly, that New York Presbyterian has set up a clinic specifically for this, and that's your full-time engagement right now?
Well, mostly the hospital is just full of COVID positive patients right now. So even the children's hospital has been like taken over, where like so many, children were moved to kind of a different part of the hospital, and all these units, even there, have been used for now just adults who have this infection. And so the hospital is totally full with COVID patients, almost on every unit. So, but what they created, because visitors aren't allowed right now, you can imagine how distressing that must be to some of these. Many people are dying and they can't even have family come and visit. So they created a hospice unit, which is normally not part of the hospital, but hospice means, very close to dying. Right. Right now it's like hours to days for most of the people that are being admitted into the hospice unit. And these are all COVID positive patients, and I'm working there right now. So I'm directly, there's 13 beds. And so I'm just spending my time on this unit where basically people are just coming in, dying, and we're trying to make arrangements that maybe one visitor in the family can come at a scheduled time and they can just see them. Or we're also walking in the rooms now with iPads, and we're letting families see through that, through that medium, where they can see their loved ones before they pass away or share some final words. And so it's a very intense situation right now, you can imagine.
I can't even imagine. We shared a few days back that one of our regular listeners, Kulavira, his mother recently, both his parents came down with. His father still struggling, so our prayers for his father. And his mother passed away, and she was just admitted to the hospital, and he couldn't see her, and that was it. So I know that that's been one of the most painful aspects of this whole crisis, is that when people are dying, that the family can't be there with them. So it's we've heard from even some of our own, many of our regular listeners are also serving in similar capacities in hospitals, and in some of the hospitals we've heard that they've set up something similar where people can come, where a relative can come and visit. But you're right in the middle of that every day. You must have some interesting stories to share. I'd be interested to hear if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I believe it was, there was, a patient was passing away, and they called the daughter. It was an older woman, and she was COVID positive, and she was, I think, in her early 80s. And she was brought into this hospice, and then her just health deteriorated very quickly. And so we called the daughter and just said that, she has maybe hours to live. Sometimes it's hard to predict exactly, and the daughter said, I'm not going to be able to get there. She's not in New York. And so she wanted spiritual care, and I contacted her, and she said, I just want you to just go there and please just pray for her, and if they don't let you in, just pray outside of the door. She had so much faith that she just wanted this to be, some spiritual aspect. She needed to be involved. So even if you can't go in, she said, just stand outside the door and just please pray that God's presence is there. And so I was able to go, and actually I did go inside the room, and I just prayed for her. She was very, very sick, not able to communicate, but stayed for some time there with her. And I also just began to chant because, she just wanted prayer, and my chanting is just trying to invoke God, get myself out of the way, and just have God's presence be there. And so I was chanting, and I brought in the iPad, and she was able to see, her mother, and she was so grateful. And she passed away while I was chanting. So it was an amazing experience. And so, a lot of the patients I'm serving right now, they're like very sick. So it's I'm not like talking so much to them or communicating. It's more just like being there and trying to, do whatever I can. So
have you had
one reason?
Ghanashyam, have you had things that bolster your faith in spiritual philosophy by witnessing a person leave their body? Like, what's it like to witness a person leave? And does it bolster your faith, or does it hurt your faith?
Yeah, it can be either. It can be either of those, depending on what the departure is like. I've seen people really fearful at that time, and I've seen people angry at that time. I've seen people totally peaceful at that time. So, if you look at it externally like that, you can imagine seeing somebody just totally afraid and screaming or something like that can really, it's hard to watch something like that. And but I'm just trusting that I'm noticing when people die, things, you're shedding the body, but you also have to shed certain things that are happening inside of you. And so it may be fears coming to the surface. It may be anger comes to the surface. And so it's I think good advice for all of us when we're around somebody who's dying in a way that maybe scares us, that we can trust that they're also shedding something right now from within that has to come out. So don't be afraid. You can just be there. Don't turn away from it, and don't try to change it even sometimes. Just let it be, because it's also something just that they're getting rid of, Sometimes very peaceful people suddenly at the very end become very angry at nurses and doctors, and you're wondering like what's going on. But I've just come to understand that, we can trust that you're letting go of certain things, and maybe you're getting something out. And then, life is going to continue, and then your journey continues, but things have to come out. And so, but I've seen some very, very inspiring things as well.
What was inspiring?
There was a man not too long ago, and
give me some hope. Give me some good.
Okay.
I don't think you're built for this job, Raghunath.
There's a man recently who he was Hindu, and when he found out there was a Hindu chaplain, he said, please, invite him to come. And so I went to see this man, and I asked him, I heard that, you're Hindu. He was a dentist, very pious Indian man, and he was dying. And he said, I said, I heard that you're from the Hindu tradition. I said, which particular form of God do you worship or love? He said, Krishna. And I said, well, I was like, I'm always waiting for this moment. It doesn't happen often in the hospital.
Big day. You've been waiting for this.
Yeah. So I was so happy, and I was telling him I'm also a devotee of Krishna, and he was so happy. And so he said to me, okay, I grew up worshiping Krishna, and I've lived my life, but I don't know what to do right now. I'm dying. I'm going to be dying soon. And I asked him, is there anything else you want to do right now? Is there anything that's something you still need to say or that you need to do? He said, no, I have no regrets. And he said, I have my family. I've worked my life. I've done the best that I could. And it's powerful to ask that question. Is there still something you need to do?
Right.
Or say, because a lot of people have these regrets, and that becomes a block for anything else for them to, if you want to connect to God, there's sometimes the block, what's in the way is that you still have something else you need to do or say.
You're like a death coach. That's your job. You're like if you have these life coaches, you're coaching them to leave.
So he said, I have no regrets. And I said, that's perfect. I said that the only thing you need to do now, if you have no regrets and you feel good about your life and how you've lived, now all you have to do is fix your mind at Krishna's feet. He said, okay, how do I do that? And he said, can we chant Bhagavad Gita? So I was chanting some verses from Bhagavad Gita, but I noticed there wasn't really, there's Sanskrit verses. He wasn't connecting so much. And then he wanted to do something else. I talked to him about chanting, I chanted with him. And also he had a hard time, he didn't practice that throughout his life, so it was hard for him to really connect to it. So I had the idea that to get him a picture of Krishna. And I went home and I had this calendar from the Bhakti Center of Radha Mulidhar. And I brought this beautiful picture.
So that means in the temple at the Bhakti Center, there's the forms of Radha and Krishna there. We call them Radha Murlidhar. Right? So you had a beautiful photograph of them. Yeah, beautiful photograph. And I brought it to him. And when he saw this picture, he just, grabbed it in his hands and he said, I've never seen Krishna so beautiful. He said, put it up right above my bed in the room. So I put it on the wall there. And it was amazing to watch how this transformed everything. All of his family they were all coming to visit, and they were all seeing the picture, and they'd stop and just say a prayer. He was praying to the picture, and he was just gazing, just looking at this picture. And he was saying, I can't believe that Krishna is here like this in New York. He said, I've never seen that. Such a beautiful Krishna, and he's been here in New York, and I've never known. I've lived so many years here in New York. And so it was amazing because this picture, I realized it simplified everything. Just visually looking at this form was changing everything. Even the nurses and doctors were coming in the room, they're just seeing this picture, and they're kind of like, bowing their head a little bit because they were just picking up that's what the family does, and they were also trying to be respectful. And he was watching all of this and just appreciating all of this. And so I heard overnight, I wasn't there, but his wife told me when he did pass, and he was looking at the picture, and he asked his wife to take the picture off the wall. She took it off the wall, and he held it right in front of his face and then put it to his chest, like almost embracing it. And he left his body like that. That's beautiful.
Job well done.
Job well done. Job well done. You know what? Hearing this, what really just occurred to me in a really big way, okay? Hear me out. Is that our philosophy, it's meant to draw us deeper, that we see God everywhere, and we see how God comes to us, right? So we're reading just coincidentally, the section of the Bhagavatam we're at is reading about the passing away of Bhishma Deva, which is, in all of the Vedic literature, maybe the most famous death scene, where Bhishma is lying on his bed of arrows. And he was actually lying there for about a month, waiting. Waiting. In one sense, he was waiting for the right astrological moment. But far more importantly, far more significantly, he was waiting for Krishna to come to him. And so Krishna came to him at that moment while he's on his deathbed. And what I'm seeing is, Krishna comes to us. He's not necessarily going to come to us in that threefold bending form, playing the flute with the peacock feather in his hair.
But he might.
But he may, but he may come to us, his wisdom, his compassion, etc., will come to us in different forms. And especially he comes in the form of his devotee. And I see what and especially we wish and we pray, that he'll come to us at the moment of death. And it seems like you've taken your training as a monk and your training in bhakti. You don't have to be a monk, but you're training in bhakti. What you've learned from Srila Prabhupada's books and reading them, what you've learned through your association with other bhakti yogis. And you kind of done in a very special way what I think we all aspire to do is become an instrument of God and to represent his compassion, represent his wisdom. And in your job, you do it by coming to people at the time of death, which was Bhishma's prayer, right? And now he has come to me at the time of death. So you get to play that role.
Yeah, it seems ridiculous to me sometimes that I'm, that it's in the sense that, I'm almost amazed to just be with people at that time and to sometimes chant. And I'm like thinking, somehow am I being used, like with no qualification, but somehow I'm coming and I'm trying to share something about Krishna for those who are open to it and those who even want it at that time. And so it's sometimes just funny to me that I'm being used in that way. And, but I'm definitely grateful to just, to be in that state of just, Krishna, use me. I don't know what I'm doing here, but by your grace, let me be an instrument.
Ghanashyam Prabhu, have you ever had any, by the way, that was a great story. Our chat board is going crazy.
People are crying like all over the place.
By the way, if you're new to the show, welcome. You can always join our live Zoom group. We've got over 100 people today on Zoom. And you just email Mara at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. And we also have a Patreon group where if you like what we're doing, you can support us. Patreon.com/wisdomofthesages. It's appreciated. It helps us. We want to do this every day. And now we're trying to do some evening classes as well. But I had a question in this regard. And you might have even said something to me because you came up that once with your wonderful wife. And we did this program, the Madhuram program together. And it was the first time. I always knew you, but I never got to really hang out with you. And I had such a great weekend with you. And I really haven't spoken to you much since then. But you told a story of a near-death experience. Have you had, and I've read books on, I'm always fascinated with near-death experiences, reincarnation, things like this. Have you met people that have died and come back to life and had some breakthrough or some inspiration or some lesson? And what's that like? Can you explain NDEs?
Yes, there is a woman who she had a cardiac arrest, when she came into the hospital, which means, the heart stops momentarily, and she was resuscitated. And when then she kind of recovered, and she was just, recovering in the hospital bed after this. And she called, even though she was a Catholic woman, a pretty devout Catholic woman, she called our office and asked for a Hindu priest. And so that was interesting. So I went there and I said, I heard you're Catholic, but you asked to speak with a Hindu priest. Why is that? She said, because when my heart stopped, even though it was just a few moments, I had an experience, and I tried to share this experience with my Catholic priest, and he didn't really believe me. And he kind of just thought I hallucinated a little bit. And so she's like, I thought maybe somebody from a different tradition. She's like, because I know it was real. I know what I saw and experienced is real. And I thought maybe another tradition has some insight into what happened. So I said, I'm happy to hear, what your experience was. And so I don't know if this is going to be an inspiring one, Raghunath group, but there's a lesson. There's a lesson. But
is this the Yamaduta one?
Yeah, it is actually.
Maybe you can describe. Maybe you can describe before you tell this. Maybe you need to share briefly what how this relates to the Bhagavatam and what's there in the Bhagavatam. Or you tell the stories you like, but I just want to make sure that you're conscious of filling in our listeners.
Yes. In the 6th canto the Bhagavatam, there's a story of a devotee named Ajamil, and it's a beautiful story, and it's about exactly what we're talking about. He grew up pretty pious and pretty devout, and he was a devotee, but he fell away from that, and he started to perform just very, he had many bad habits, and he kind of fell away from it, and now he's in old age, and he named one of his sons. He had some children, and he named one of his sons after a name of God, which was Narayana. Narayan is also a name of God. And when it came to the point where he was passing away, it's like he was in that state of regret, and that because he had started off his life in, like I said, a devotional way, but really fell far away from that later in life. So at that time of his dying, he was screaming out to his son Narayan, and Narayan also, again, being a name of God, what he had an experience that right before, as he was getting ready to leave his body, that these beings came to him. They were very dark beings, very harsh and
terrifying,
grotesque. And they came and they were kind of pulling his soul from his body. Like, not inauspicious. These beings were not auspicious. So they were pulling him, and he was struggling, but he was still calling out the name of his son Narayan. And because the name Narayan is a name of God, these other beings also came. So it's like these beings of darkness and these beings of light then came to the devotees of Narayan. And
they're called
the Vishnu Dutas. Yeah. So then you have this man, you can imagine the scene. This man is passing away, and there's like this fight between these two different categories of beings of light and beings of darkness. And they're saying, hey, who does this soul belong to? Because, okay, yeah, he's had so many bad habits throughout his life. He's made so many mistakes, but he's also saying the name of God right now. So the higher light beings were saying, he's coming with us because he's uttering the name of God, and he's our property. And the others were saying, no, look what he's done throughout his life. He's coming with us. And so this is a little bit of the background of the story. And then there's a whole conversation and how things unfold. It's all revealed in the Bhagavatam.
And so yeah.
Yeah. So those are the Yamadutas, were these darker beings. And that's a little bit more connected to the story I was going to share.
They're meant to bring them to Yama, the god of death, for punishment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this Catholic woman, she said, so this is what I experienced. She said, when my heart stopped, even though it was just a few moments, I had this experience where these beings came before me. And she described them in exactly the same way. She said they were very ugly, and they were pulling at me. She said they were trying to pull me out of my body, and I was fighting to stay within my body. And so she said this struggle went on, and it was very, she was terrified. And finally, she kind of came back. She was resuscitated by doctors, and she came back, and she was trying to make sense. Her question for me was, her question was interesting. Her question was, I felt like these beings were taking me someplace very dark. I feel like they were taking me to hell, she said. And her question for me was, how can that be? I've been a pretty good person throughout my life. Like I'm not like evil. I've made some mistakes, I have some regrets, but I've mostly lived a pretty good life. But I know I wasn't going anywhere good with these beings just from the look and how they were acting and looking. I knew they were real, and I knew they were taking me to someplace very dark. And so, yeah, that was her question. So, how could God do this to me?
She came to the right person for the answer. I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
Well, I didn't just give some answer to that question, but I kind of turned it a little bit, because I was saying, well, the point is, you had that experience, but you didn't go to hell. Why would God give you such an experience? Maybe there's something you can still do now, you need to do right now. Maybe this is an opportunity for you now to turn to God in a deeper way. You know, the fact is, it didn't happen. So you didn't go to hell. And maybe you had some experience that came to you just to give you now a kind of focus now. You know, maybe you can reflect on your life while you're here in the hospital. You know, things are slowed down. You're here alone. You have a lot of time, and maybe you can reflect on your life, and you can put your mind more on God, you know, and so you have an opportunity. You have a chance now. And so I kind of left her with that, you know, and she really appreciated that. And she did tell me, she invited me back a couple of days later, and she's like, I've been thinking about my life a lot. I do want to make some changes. And, you know, she was grateful. So it was kind of like, yeah, I had no idea how to respond to that question, but what came to mind was Prabhupada wrote a book from the story of Ajamil called A Second Chance.
Yeah.
And so it kind of came to my mind that telling her that you have another chance, you have a second chance. So whatever that experience was, it didn't take you to where you're fearing, but maybe now you can reflect and see how to better your life in other ways and becoming more.
It's
devoted.
fascinating to see these stories which people will write off as mythological.
Oh yeah. So let me, when I went back to my manager, and because he was also curious why she was asking for a Hindu priest if she was Catholic. So I told him the story, and he said, oh, and he's been a chaplain for about 50 years in the hospital. He said, oh, I've heard about those beings so many times. He's like, you know, he's like, these beings are always in the hospital, because I've heard this story in a variety of forms for, 50 years I've heard this. So he's like, there's no doubt that such beings exist, because I've heard it so many times.
That is incredible. That is incredible.
Yeah.
I have
advice. That was great advice. Maybe you can do something. Maybe you can do something. You didn't die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have a big question for you now. And our time is winding down, so I wanted to make sure that I asked this. But the whole world is going through a type of, you could call it a crisis, or some people might describe it as a horror, or people describe it in different ways. But death is visiting in us, in a unique way, and the whole world is kind of responding in a unique way. It's kind of historic what's going on. And obviously people that are contemplative are going to wonder, what is this really all about? Why is this happening? And I would be very interested to hear from you, a person who's well-versed in spiritual philosophy, a person who's dealing with death in a profound way on a daily basis, a person who's like, I saw someone on the chat board wrote, how do you keep even-minded? But I think you are perhaps one of the most even-minded people that I've ever met in my life. I don't think I've ever seen you upset or disturbed or you're one of the most level-headed people I've ever met. I'd be very interested to get your perspective. How do you view this whole thing? Do you see, is there a reason behind it? Is there something we're meant to learn? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on the coronavirus in general. Why is the world going through this right now?
Yeah, well, I think, I have to have a little faith in suffering, I kind of have some faith in suffering, because this is also part of Krishna, God's plan. Like, why is there suffering in the world, and why is there disease, and why is there death? Even karma, this law of cause and consequence, all of this is also within the infinite wisdom of God. Even these laws are created to actually bring us back, to reconnect us to our spirits and to God. So to really start to trust a little bit, even in suffering, like in sometimes, the work that I'm doing in the hospital, I'm not trying to stop people suffering always, because we're going through something, a certain process. I've seen some people through suffering, they become much more mild and humble, and they awaken spiritually in a new and different way. And of course, that's not always the case. So maybe we have to go through other experiences to kind of get there, but to trust that also even these things that are happening in the world right now, and this disease, this, coronavirus, there's a lot of fear, but kind of going through it and trusting that, in the midst of this suffering, then there can be such powerful breakthroughs. So this is why, disease death is so powerful. These can be really transforming experiences if we open up to that possibility. And so now everybody's in a different place, so not everybody can get there immediately. But the idea, just the nature of suffering, it's kind of bringing you closer to God in one sense. You're approaching God by the misery that's sometimes created, because then you start to seek and you start to ask questions maybe you've never asked before. And so only suffering does that, you know? And so only suffering really does that. I mean, and again, we're all in different places with that, but there is some part of us that says, what is the solution to this? And what is the answer? And is there a way to stop suffering? I mean, this is the story of the Buddha. You know, he just had the realization that life is suffering. Now let me seek what the solution to that is. And that's kind of the purpose of it. And so even now with this is happening, you know, I kind of feel like there's a lot of fear, but there's incredible opportunities right now. You know, we can seize the opportunity right now. And every day we can ask ourselves, what is the deeper meaning of all this? How can this change me? You know, sometimes, you know, we can just have that question while you're going through suffering. You can pray while you're suffering, whatever it may be. You can pray, God, please let this change me. Let this experience of what I'm going through right now purify me and change me. If you have that intention in prayer, it will happen. You know, so I'm seeing it in that way right now, like seeing it as wow, this is an incredible opportunity for all of us right now to face fears, to look into our hearts, and to pray to be changed by all of this, to be changed, transformed by all of it. If you think that, you know, our premise as devotees of God and Krishna is that our premise is that life is meant for transformation.
Yes.
If you really believe that, then you'll start to have some faith even in suffering, because you'll see that this is an incredible way to rapidly advance. If I can put my mind, if I can take deeper shelter of devotees, of hearing, of chanting, you know, the different practices we do.
This was so beautiful. I'm sad we have to wrap it up, but it's time to wrap it up. But I wanted to say maybe a group prayer, and we believe there's a power in group prayer, and so we could all just say the Maha Mantra together. We're muted, but we're all saying it publicly. It's sort of like dedicated to anyone who's going through some suffering right now, or suffering with some loved one, and even maybe a prayer for Ghanashyam and all the people in healthcare and restaurants, or people who are dealing with people who could potentially spread the virus to them, but yet they're putting their own life on the line for the benefit of others. Let's just take a moment of prayer for that. And we are super grateful, and we're going to invite you right now to come back, if you will. I know you're busy. I know you're probably overwhelmed. I know your family wants to see you, and
you've been up all night.
You've been up all night. You've been up all night. And we're inspired, and we're moved, and I think we're a little bit more sober for our spiritual life. My wife is sitting next to me crying. Everyone's making crying emojis on the chat board. That's a sign. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Ghanashyam Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. This was really wonderful. I'm so grateful for what you guys are doing.
And Kaustubha Prabhu, thank you for actually everybody. As Ghanashyam Prabhu was saying, we could be immersing our minds. Not everybody is taking the suffering and turning it into something positive. A lot of people are binge watching a Breaking Bad and Howard Stern. Listen to Howard Stern in times of great suffering. Walk forward towards some spiritual light in your life. We are happy you're here, part of this community. I'm grateful because I feel like you guys are lifting me up from my depths, in my nether regions. And now, Ghanashyam, this is our funnest part of the day. This is when we do Krishna karaoke and wind up the show in style. So I'm going to ask you to lift your hands up high. And turn that namaste into a hand clap. Ghanashyam, we want you back. want you to know that. Ready? Thanks to everybody who joined late. Sorry, Priya, Alvin, Don Cayley, Prabhu, Noah Weissman, Leah. This chair bounces as I dance. We had 108 people, Kaustubha.